If you like what you're hearing, put your money where your media is by supporting ad-free independent podcasts like this one. Go to lauraflanders.com/membership, and thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is The Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real models of shifting power from the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, politics, and activism. This week, what lies ahead for change makers in 2018, the right and the rest? We'll talk politics, culture, and economics with alt-right watcher Tarso Ramos and new economy activist Sarah Ludwig. Their conversation and my thoughts on the week, 15 years after the world said no to war. It's all coming up here on The Laura Flanders Show, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. Welcome. In his first State of the Union speech, for once, Donald Trump did the predictable. He cheered for his administration's triumphs and declared the country much improved. Growth is up, unemployment is down. Trump claims credit for the stock market's peaks. But that may not last as the effects of GOP spending cuts and tax breaks kick in. And beneath the snapshot headlines, what is actually going on? What's changed economically, politically, culturally? And what have we learned, not just about the Donald, but about the forces and dynamics that won him the White House? What is real, in other words, and what's rhetoric? And for those who worry about violence and division and panic, where are we seeing interesting or noteworthy alliances shaping up? To help me take stock of all of those questions and more, I bet, I welcome now Tarso Luis Ramos, Executive Director of Political Research Associates, a progressive research group with expertise in the right and the so-called alt-right, and Sarah Ludwig, who is founder and co-director of the New Economy Project, a longtime grassroots organizer for neighborhood equity and financial justice. Both are former guests on the show, but never together, and I'm thrilled to bring you back around the same table. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Laura.
So let's start with the big question. What's changed? What hasn't? Politically, economically, culturally?
A lot has changed in a year, and quite a bit hasn't. One of the things that's changed is that some of Donald Trump's strongest detractors on the right, networks like the Kochs and the Mercers, have come to rally to his defense, including with promises of upwards of $400 million to spend the midterm elections. It's a kind of reward for the tax heist bill. So the same folks who scuttled much of Trump's legislative agenda, because until the tax bill, really there was nothing that he could turn to as an accomplishment, are now rallying to his defense and trying to hold the line against the possibility of some blowback in the midterm elections. So that's a significant change. We've also seen the fall from grace and from Trump's inner circle of some liaisons between the administration and the alt-right, folks like Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka. But we still have unprecedented access to the White House from white nationalists, particularly around immigration reform, by way of Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions. Yeah. And so there's been quite a bit of change and some real continuity.
All right, so sort of the political background. What about on the ground in real terms? What's happening with the people you work with, Sarah?
Well, I mean, what's happening with the people we work with in New York, which is mainly people who are part of base building, organizing, community-based organizations that are fighting for racial and economic justice. There's sort of an interesting dichotomy in the work. On one hand, I don't think that the analysis has changed for a lot of groups. A lot of the inequities that people have been working very hard to address haven't changed, they're systemic. Right. So the analysis and the critique haven't changed, but the realities for so many people have really dramatically changed.
How
I think
so?
Particularly about immigrant New Yorkers who are fighting for their lives ultimately. And also just the sort of government for and by the 1%, which is so hideously transparent. We've had other pendulum swings in the past politically when groups like ours stop fighting at the sort of for gains at the federal level. That's all been clearly abandoned. We've refocused our work very much on state and local and community organizing, which were always core parts, but now it's all that we do. So on one hand, you've got groups that are fighting to hold on to even meager gains from the previous administration. I think of certainly the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right, which is under full frontal assault. So we're fighting to hold on to that. A lot of resources are going into fighting for these crumbs, if you will. We had a most gigantic financial economic meltdown in 2008, and out came this financial reform, which barely put reins on Wall Street. And, that's under assault. One's fighting on that, but then there's tremendous radicalization that's going on, which is very exciting to see, where groups realize that this kind of reformist approach to social justice and to these inequities has to take place in a more systemic way.
If what Sarah's saying is true, and it seems patently true when you look around, and the promises that Trump ran on in 2016, particularly to the so-called white working class, but to poor people, particularly white people, have proven this hollow, what happens to his political project?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last year is that Trump has offered nothing of particular economic benefit to everyday people in this country. And so instead what he's offered are non-material benefits to what he thinks of as his voting base, separate from his donor base in the constituency of the 1%, the Mercers and the Kochs and folks like that. And so we haven't seen, for instance, student loan relief, but we've seen a repeal of guidelines around sexual assault on campuses. We haven't seen manufacturing come back to the United States the way Trump promised in these hollow terms throughout the election campaign, but we have seen the Muslim ban, the ban on transgender service in the military. We have seen him go after black identity extremists as though that was a thing in the United States in ways to signify support for his base defined in very exclusionary racial and ethnic terms.
Because we have to remember the people who actually voted for him were not the poorest of the poor. They were voted overwhelmingly Democratic. It was the people just above that, right? And then further up.
Which has been the traditional base of support for reactionary, authoritarian style politics. And many of those people really are going to be hurt, actually, by the tax reform that Trump managed to get through. And the folks who most benefit from that are exactly the donor class who are now pumping hundreds of millions of dollars to try to shore up their majority in Congress at this point.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guests this week are Tarso Luis Ramos, Executive Director of Political Research Associates, and Sarah Ludwig, co-founder of the New Economy Project. These people, those people, how do we break through the divisive rhetoric and get to the facts on the economic policies that are setting us one against the other, and perhaps come up with better ideas? More to come.
Since the election, we have created 2.4 million new jobs.
New jobs are fantastic, yes, on that we can agree. It's 2.4 million, a lot, let's take a look and see. We went through and checked it and then checked it once again. Those are the worst job numbers since the year 2010.
Roughly 3 million workers have already gotten tax cut bonuses. Many of them thousands and thousands of dollars per worker.
Only 2% received a bonus or a raise, while other tens of thousands were surprised in other ways. When Harley, Pfizer, Walmart, Comcast, Carrier, and GE joined AT&T and several others on a layoff spree.
That was Did He Lie? A parody commentary on the State of the Union by theparodyproject.com, with lyrics by Don Caron, loosely based on music by the Sherman Brothers, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Did you know you could watch this show on Link TV, Free Speech TV, and CUNY TV, or at our website, lauraflanders.com? We're recording the TV show on a brand new set with a whole lot of words on it. Take a look. You can subscribe right there to this podcast too, so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying what you're hearing, or in fact would like us to switch things up somehow, how about writing a review on iTunes? It takes just a moment and it's critically important to us. Really, we are counting on you to help us spread the word. Now back to my guests. Tarso Luis Ramos, Executive Director of Political Research Associates, has been researching the U.S. right wing for over 2 decades. And Sarah Ludwig, co-founder of the New Economy Project, has been working on these issues in New York for just as long. So far, they say, Donald Trump's promises of economic prosperity have proven hollow, even for his voting base, albeit bountiful for his donors. At one and the same time, scary times are radicalizing people, even as the inadequate institutions of democracy, as Tarso calls them, require shoring up. It's complicated. Take a listen.
I'm hearing from both of you, and I appreciate you being together in this conversation, because I feel like these two conversations don't happen at the same table very often. Where do you see the connection between the work that Tarso's laying out, which is fairly scary stuff having to do with the fringes of democracy. What happens when people lose confidence and are turned against each other and are sold this bill of antagonism one from the other. How does your work relate to that? Because you must come across it in your new economy work. And new economy work isn't necessarily about racial justice or new politics.
No, I think that's true. I mean, for us at our organization, new economy work is very explicitly about racial justice. It's rooted in creating a just economy that works for everybody, but it's fundamentally about racial and economic justice. It's about sustainability, it's about cooperation and so forth. So, I mean, what we're seeing groups do, which is very exciting, is not pursuing models that are new necessarily, but pursuing them much more enthusiastically and rigorously. So whether it's creating community land trusts to take land out of the speculative market and put it within community control. I mean, you've got so many people who risk losing their homes and have lost their homes, all the pressures of displacement. It's a way for people to stay in communities and have self-determination over land, over their housing, and so forth. And linking that to other efforts like the formation of worker cooperatives and financial cooperatives where people actually have control over their money. And for these different models, and the list goes on, I mean, we're also working to create a public bank for New York, to really sort of take Wall Street and all these destructive forces out of people's lives so that they can come together and really forge strong neighborhood economies that bring together these different sort of visions of cooperation that are such a different approach and really sort of people are looking for lasting solutions to withstand what's going on in the nightmare that we're living in right now. So it doesn't really get to your question of kind of tying these together, except that it's planting sort of a long-term vision in actually very practical models that people are showing by doing. It's sort of proof of concept by actually doing this work, but then bringing them together into a sphere so that people who are doing community-based financial organizing see the people doing mutual housing and community land trusts, and that's what hasn't really happened before in our work.
And you, Tasa, you've been all over the country talking, as you said. What have you seen, and what's inspired you in terms of the type of work that's happening?
One thing that connects the kinds of examples Sarah's giving to some other things I've seen is this tremendous challenge in this moment to, on the one hand, defend against the further erosion of kind of formal democratic infrastructure, much of it quite inadequate to the task of democracy. So whether that's the Consumer Protection Bureau, whether that's the judiciary in this moment where Trump, one of his lasting impacts may be stacking the federal judiciary with people who've come out of the Federalist Society and other kinds of things. So on the one hand, we have this task of shoring up totally inadequate institutions of democracy and simultaneously mobilizing tremendous energy and support for more transformative changes down the road. That's an incredibly difficult set of challenges, to hold simultaneously. You see some of those dilemmas reflected in strategy around the elections. What sort of candidates are progressives going to back, and what kind of electoral strategies? Is it going to be about deep investment in community capacity and mobilization and in the South and with Black women leading the way, for instance? Or is it going to be the typical set of swing state, late pilot, drop-in, air war advertising kind of campaigns that we've come to expect in this country? And there are real fights over how that's going to play out. So this question of whether this is a moment that galvanizes enough people around transformation, or whether the bar becomes the very low bar of anything but Trumpism, is, I think, one of the essential tensions and debates that's happening across many different kinds of campaigns, communities, sectors of the social justice.
Yeah, I call it the danger of not Donaldism. Anybody but him. Did you want to come in on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just picking up on what Tarso's saying. There's, in the organizing world, there's sort of these new alliances that are being forged based on this dichotomy that we're talking about, which is, do we defend and hold on to things that are being attacked and aggressively dismantled, whether it's public education? I mean, obviously there's, as a threshold, all things environmental and climate related. And are we working towards imagining and implementing a different vision and different approaches? And some groups are straddling that effectively and doing both, but there's also this sort of cleaving taking place where some groups, maybe they're holding on to the institutions and trying to ward off, real dismantling, but then some are still stuck in this notion that this is just a short-term thing, everything's going to be okay. Obviously, we see a lot of the Democratic Party kind of on this mindset that, we just have to kind of weather this and then, we'll be back to some status quo.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is quite dangerous, actually.
Can we talk about the alt-right and misogyny for a minute? Because it may feel like a leap, but I'm thinking about so many of the people that I know involved in new economy work are women and women of color and immigrant women, people doing so much of the work about remaking society bottom up are of the female variety. And at the same time, we've had this assault on women, rhetorical, actual, met by beautiful displays of courage and solidarity and intergenerational support. I think of that extraordinary NASA hearing. I'm waiting for the backlash that you said was very much part of what brought Trump into power. Where is it? Is it happening? Can I relax? Can I exhale yet?
You cannot relax. I think that's clear.
No, there's no relaxing allowed. Certainly, part of the energy that delivered the boost for Trump, say from the alt-right, was as much about misogyny as it was about white nationalism and kind of ethnocentrism. And I think that persists to this day. I think there's a reason why DeVos at Education came in and immediately went after standards around sexual assault on campus. I mean, that
proved just how anti-feminist she was.
That was a reward to the base, as well as advancing a broader strategy around redirecting the priorities of the Department of Education in very scary ways. And so the misogyny hasn't gone away by a long shot. And I think one of the big challenges for us in this moment is translating some of the righteous anger that we see represented in the Me Too phenomenon and the Nassar hearings and so forth into focus on structural inequality. Yeah. So just as in the presidential election of 2016, there was one kind of progressive conversation around the economy and a separate one around race. In fact, the economy is structured in deeply racialized ways, just as it's structured in deeply gendered ways.
Well, there was a third conversation about Hillary Clinton.
Indeed, there was. And yet, most of the national discourse around sexualism and sexual assault is happening on the level of interpersonal dynamics or contained within specific industries, as opposed to broadening that to a question of fundamental economic inequality that's baked into the U.S. system. Yeah. After the election, there was a lot of sort of liberal hand-wringing that, well, the problem somehow was that there was too much talk about racism and too much talk about sexism and gender, and not enough talk about the economy in a way that would appeal to a white working class. I think the lessons of this moment are not that the left progressives should shut up about race, sexuality, or gender, but that we have to talk about those things in ways that are actually related to economic inequality and related to the core issues that everybody's experiencing in this country.
This is Laura Flanders. You're listening to The Laura Flanders Show. My guests this time are Tarso Luis Ramos, Executive Director of Political Research Associates, and Sarah Ludwig, co-founder of the New Economy Project in New York. There is no relaxing allowed when it comes to addressing the drivers of inequality in Trump times, they say. More to come.
Wherever you go, this fire follows, warming your soul and filling the hollows of a heart growing old and tired. Now you're walking with fire.
That was Walking with Fire by Sylvia Black with Jaleel Shaw from sylviablackmusic.com. If you appreciate the stories we're bringing you on this podcast, as well as the TV show or radio program, how about taking a little time to show us some love? Would you make a one-time donation, or better yet, sign up to become a monthly contributor? You get access to all sorts of extra info. You can do both at lauraflanders.com, and while you're there, sign up to follow us on social media and help spread the word about this podcast or the community radio station where you may be hearing us right now. It helps, honestly. Later on, I try to imagine an actual human family. Now back to my guests, Tarso Luis Ramos and Sarah Ludwig. Sharing personal experiences of racial and gender inequality takes guts, but it's a must if we're really going to remake our economy, they say. Take a listen.
maybe just thinking out loud again, but it does seem to me that we can see what's happened around Me Too as about women's empowerment and gender violence. It is. Patriarchy, misogyny, all of that. But it's also people telling their truth and breaking some kind of an illusion of everything okay. And I wonder if, in a way, the new economy movement isn't a little bit of that too, of people saying, you know what, actually, this economy that we've been told is okay, with ups and downs, but generally okay, capitalism, America, the American dream, it's really not okay, and let me tell you about my life.
I think there's an element of that in people seeing the sort of sham that is Trump's spoken agenda and the sort of false populism of it all. And that as people see just this hideously transparent lie about what he's about and sort of the talk versus the tax cut and all of that stuff, that's actually explicitly exacerbating inequality.
Right.
As they see that sham, they realize this is it, where we have to really change the way that we approach everything that we work on. And I think your point about understanding sort of the racial justice work and the gender justice work in an economic context is where we have to go next. And lots of people are saying this. Trump knows very well that people's fixation on his craziness, his family, Russia, you name it, actually serves him very well as a distraction. And it's a distraction from all the things that we're talking about. And there are people who see that distraction and they just want to roll up their sleeves and change their communities and change their lives. And that's what we're seeing that's very exciting at the neighborhood level. It's mostly women, but not exclusively. It's mostly women of color that we're working with, a lot of immigrant women here in New York. And you know, what choice do they have? I mean, it's a question also of survival to some extent. But the idea of sort of building community and going for broke in these times, I think, is partly about truth, how you put it.
And what happens to our structural analysis? I mean, to go back to the very important point you made earlier, how do we get to the structural pieces while we're really scared in lots of this country about an awful lot of people with an awful lot of guns? And a lot of license after this administration's been in power for so long.
This past year was a high watermark for white nationalist, fascist, openly fascist movements in the United States, at least for several decades, back to the 80s or early 90s. If we look at the level of mobilization, if we look at the level of political support and space, including defenses that came from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, even after the murderous rally in Charlottesville. It's just been a tremendous year for the white nationalist movement, notwithstanding the fall from grace of Bannon and other people who were kind of translators for that movement into the White House. So these are very scary times, and at the same time we have a series of seemingly transparent economic betrayals, and they're certainly clear to the kind of people that you organize. And a big question is, given the level of unpopularity, for instance, about the tax reform and the tax hike, which is just a giveaway, right, to the 1%, is at what point is that betrayal felt even by some of Trump's own voting base, and what do they do with that sense of betrayal?
Right.
Who interprets that betrayal for them? Who appeals and organizes them into some kind of an alternative to just rage and anger? Because it's not automatic that sense of betrayal will result in a rejection of Trumpism. It could result in a further embrace of the xenophobia and the misogyny and the other elements that are part of his package.
And couldn't there be a temptation in your part of this conversation, Sarah, for people to say, let's just create this co-op and not deal with our racial and other tensions because we'll never get the co-op part done. Let's not talk politics. Let's just try to create a credit union.
I think that exists in some spheres. It's certainly not the work that we're doing because it's all very much deeply rooted in that. And, you know, yes, you can sort of have a co-op and have it not have anything to do with racial justice, and it's just kind of an opting out, that we're going to reject the sort of mainstream economic arrangements and over here do this side thing, kind of have a shadow economy. We're working to really change things in a much broader transformational way that is about, what we're talking about. So here in New York, one of the things that's come out of this moment is that groups, labor groups, community groups, civil rights organizations have come together to create an affirmative agenda for the whole state of New York around economic justice. And so that's about to be unveiled. It's got these very clean, clear planks. It's about resistance. It's about neighborhood and personal self-determination for people in New York communities. It ties together work that's already was going on, but we couldn't have pulled it together if we were in a different moment, for sure. And it's also a rejection of attempts to deregulate Wall Street, to introduce predatory lending in places where it's been banned. That's been a big, big fight here in New York.
Well, we're going to cover every step of your way. It sounds very exciting. Do you want to end on an up note of some kind, Tarso?
I think that these are very scary times, and partly as a result of that, there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands more people who understand themselves as historical actors in this moment, and are forming their sense or reforming their sense of self in their political identities. And so there is tremendous opportunity for organizers and educators like yourself to really inform the direction of that mobilization and make sure that it's not just a blip in short-term resistance work, but really about doing a combination of that resistance and building long-term alternatives. And so there's a lot to work with.
That was Tarso Luis Ramos, Executive Director of Political Research Associates, speaking with Sarah Ludwig, co-founder of the New Economy Project. For more information on my guests and their organizations, or to watch this entire interview, go to lauraflanders.com. Coming up next, my thoughts on this mad week. It's been just about a year since working women of all kinds gathered at the U.S. Department of Labor and said no to a woman-abusing, worker-exploiting, Trump-supported nominee to head the U.S. Department of Labor. As I heard journalist Sarah Jaffe put it recently, that successful mobilization against chain restaurant titan and wife abuser Andrew Puzder was in many ways the start of the Me Too movement. Since then, who can keep track of all the abusers and all the abused who've spoken up? Who can keep track and who can explain the use of so much daily force and violence, fear and terror against so many people we claim to recognize as, well, people, sisters, friends, family members, employees? How do we let it happen? And why is it so rare that we make it stop? How do we accept the silence, the going on as normal? And then I try to remember that we don't always go along. Sometimes we speak up, as women did against the proposed labor secretary, and as we did as a world 15 years ago on February 15th. I remember standing in a huge crowd near the United Nations, part of a worldwide uprising of tens of millions of people in 60 countries, all saying no to waging war on Iraq. On that cold day, Nobel Peace Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "We are members of one family, God's family, the human family. How can we say we want to drop bombs on our sisters and brothers, on our children?" We said we couldn't, we didn't want to, and then we let it happen anyway. And that was 15 years ago this month. Today, according to the Cost of War Project, U.S. troops and drones and bombs are forcing themselves on people in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia. U.S. Special Forces are in a total of 76 countries, and the terrifying U.S.-led war on terror involves 39% of the countries on the planet. And so now I'm here in another cold February trying to imagine what my next hour would be like if I actually lived on a planet of people who believed that we were members of one loving family. What would that look like, feel like, breathe like? And what would we be doing with all the time we wouldn't have to be spending doing all this wondering and imagining and being silent? Got any thoughts? Write to me, tell me what you think. That's Laura, Laura, at lauraflanders.com. And thanks for listening. You can find out more about the guests on this program and watch this week's show and all our shows at lauraflanders.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already to receive additional mini-casts and commentary. The show's produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, along with Tammy Hamada-Warrenoff, Monica Mohapatra, Danica D'Souza, Diego Romero-Montiel, Jeannie Hopper, and Mira Al-Rahim. Till the next time, stay kind, stay curious. Thanks.